have to recognise that we live in an age where we can't be ignorant. You know, we just can see it all. And we must not fall into the trap of thinking just because we see something bad that somehow we shouldn't react to it or do anything about it. At the same time, we shouldn't overreact to something because we've seen it. There's a need for responsible government now more than ever. Who was next? I have no idea. Gentlemen here.
You've spoken about accuracy, and it's been worrying me for as long as this business has been going on. Why has our government not realised that accuracy might be used for a strike? Why have they not used it, realised that it might be used as a revenge target? And why are there no Patriot missiles there, as there are in other places in the Middle East?
Whether they've realised it or not, I don't know. When I intervened, no one else had mentioned it in the entire debate, which I found remarkable. And after my intervention, the Labour Party benches got very exercised, as did a number of my colleagues, because they hadn't actually realised. Which I agree with you. The quality of the debate last Thursday was not worthy of us. The fact that people didn't turn up is not worthy. And the fact that people turned up having not really thought things through about something of such great import, I must say I've been struggling with that more than anything in the last week. And it's something which, I think the people concerned, I think, are going to have to just wrestle with their own consciousness on that, really. But your point about accuracy is right. You make a lot of sense, and I'm hoping that maybe the fact that I've drawn such attention to it, and there's been articles in the Cypriot newspapers because of my intervention, that hopefully that before we go in, if we go in, that those sort of things will have been sorted out.
In fairness to the government, it should be said that the adequate Navy has actually got some anti-missile ships in Task Force Cougar in that area.
Sure, I mean, as I say, I'm not standing here as some sort of expert in knowing what's going on, and nor should I know what's going on, but the response to my intervention, Martin, was just not acceptable. There was clearly not an understanding of somebody who sits on the National Security Council.
Well, I just ask the right honourable member for the House whether he lacks faith in our Prime Minister at this point in time.
No, I genuinely don't. I think that, I think on reflection, I think things would have been different last week. I think things should have been handled differently last week. But I saw a man who had deep concern and was clearly visibly upset about the footage and the nature of the attack. And so I've got no doubt whatsoever that he genuinely wanted to react to what he thought was abhorrent. Where I think he has been let down is the people who advise him, the people around him, and I think that is something which he now realises. And so, no, I mean, I have confidence, and my vote. I mean, certainly there was scuttlebutt going around that some people were voting for other reasons against on Thursday. I can assure you, this member of Parliament was voting solely on the issue at hand and voting with his conscience. Shall I come to you, gentlemen at the back?
Dr. Lee.
Yes.
As someone,
A bit closer, sir, with the microphone.
as someone with my 5 other brothers, served in the last war.
Yes.
And I get fed up with these people keep on saying that we British have got to do this for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
We have fought a big war there.
Yeah.
And when we won the war, as soldiers, we were chucked up on the side and we had to get on with what we had to do.
Mm-hmm.
But before then, we fought, and we didn't know we were fighting to free the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
But me personally, I eventually went from France to Palestine. It was Palestine in those days, not Israel. And I was being fired at by the Jews who we had tried to save. And my best friend was blown up in the King David's Hotel, with more others. And I get fed up with these people saying the Dunkirk spirit, the Blitzkrieg, they don't know what they're talking about. I do not know what they're talking about.
Okay, I mean, yes, I mean, I agree. I mean, I'm the grandson of a Halifax tail gunner who survived 30 operations whilst 55,000 other airmen died in that campaign. And he's still alive, he's 89, and like you, he has a similar view of war as you do, because he's seen it at close hand. And so I get what you hear about it's not always Britain's fight, and it's very difficult this, because if you've got the Nazis at Calais, it seems real and present and dangerous, and so you can mobilise your country to fight the foe because it's there. You can see them, they're close, they've expressed an obvious intent to invade. The foe we're up against now, sir, is more, it's like, where is it? And where's the front line? Okay, the front line in July the 7th, 2005 was Aldgate Tube Station. You know, where is this front line? And who is the foe? And we have the rather perverse situation of any proposed intervention in Syria, where we could actually be taking the side of Al-Qaeda, or taking the side of Hezbollah, or whatever. And so it's a much more complicated situation, and it's a much more difficult thing to try and justify British engagement against what? How are we threatened? So I understand.
It could become a running sore.
It is a running sore. It's happened. It is a running sore. Our intervention in Iraq, our intervention in Afghanistan, we're in. Now, I'm just suggesting that if we're going to be in, we need to have a well thought through strategy, both of why we're going in, what we want to see and achieve, and when we leave.
And when do we stop?
Exactly. And I think that, but I would disagree with you somewhat, that this nation does have a global responsibility because of its permanent membership of the Security Council.
That's no point of doing it.
I would suggest a permanent member does have global responsibilities. And I would also suggest that we have the opportunity to engage in this, okay, this forum, this debate. We have freedom that you protected and delivered, that my grandfather did. And in my experience, when I was in Damascus and I met students of the British Council, they want the same thing, sir. That most of them want the same thing. Now, I'm not saying we're going to go on some sort of freedom crusade, but I do think that us and others, including the Germans, who can hang up their pacifism boots and get stuck in as far as I'm concerned, we have a responsibility to help people who want to have the lives we have. How we do that and how we discharge that responsibility is the conundrum, is the challenge, and which is why I keep talking about the greatest brains of a generation, because the greatest brains of a generation are not on display on Thursday. And so I'm not relying on them to come forward with a strategy. So, I'll come to you next.
Thank you, Philip. Whilst I agree with your rebel stance on last Thursday, I do support that. I'm very confused by one thing. Assad has been slaughtering civilians for 2 years. In my book, dead is dead.
Yeah.
Whether it's a bomb, a rifle, or a chemical weapon. Is it just that this chemical weapon, as unintended, has been the catalyst that's kicked it off? But I mean, you know, that we've not taken attempts to do anything about it until this has happened. Far more people have been killed, or civilians have been killed by conventional weapons in the last 2 years than were killed in the recent incidents, and it remains, we all know, slightly unclear as to who was actually responsible for it. But as I say, in my book, dead is dead. It doesn't really matter how you've been killed, you've been unlawfully killed.
Okay, I actually wrote out some speech lines on the plane back, and one of them was "dead is dead." So we're on the same page on that front, and I think that it is remarkable. I think that we have responded in the way that we have done to this, but say 1 million people being forced into starvation in North Korea, we don't respond to. And is it because we haven't seen it? Somehow that makes it less bad because we've not seen it. And I also do subscribe to the view that conventional weapons, the definition, I mean the attack on that school, for instance, which seems to have had some sort of napalm, thermite type component to the munitions, and all those people, awful pictures of people coming in with their skin dropping off, that wasn't a chemical weapons attack by international standards, that was a conventional weapons attack. But I would suggest that that's actually, you know, I mean, how do we draw these lines? I mean, it's fake, isn't it? It's false. The reason we found ourselves in a situation of responding is because Obama had drawn this red line. I mean, the most ill-advised decision, thought so at the time, because essentially he was almost baiting them to cross it. And then once it had crossed, he had to be seen to be the strong president to act on principle, and then he goes and bottles it on Friday. I mean, I think he's had a bad week, to say the least. And so I would agree with you. Why we seem to react more to chemical weapons than conventional, there is this history to this. I am the great-grandson of somebody who died from gassing on the Western Front, and it is an abhorrent weapon. There's no question of this, but it's. I think our reaction has been disproportionate because of the number of figures of people. It's over 100,000 now who've been killed in Syria. And we also need to reflect upon ourselves as to why we are reacting like this and why are we losing perspective. Because we need not to, particularly those of us who hold public office, we need to try to keep perspective when everybody else is, you know, commentators, media, everyone else is getting stirred up. We need to maintain perspective. And I'm not sure what we did last week. I think the next was this gentleman here. Hi, Jimmy.
Thank you. Dr. Lee, I'd just like to play devil's advocate for a short while, actually. President Putin has been in the news recently. He is really claiming a moral high ground. He wants any decision to prosecute a war or intervention in Syria through the United Nations and also through the unanimous view of the Security Council. And he says he will participate in any action provided there is 100% proof. Now, most of the evidence, I think, is pretty circumstantial. The real proof has to be the intercepted communications, which of course are totally hush-hush. I don't know if you've seen them or not. I know you can't really say one way or another, but you might indicate if you have seen these key communications on which a conviction of the Assad regime would take place. But I would also say that the position is terribly complicated, and I think it might have been a mistake in the past to attack the Assad regime anyway, because I think this war could have been predicted. It can only be predicted to get worse. No war is better than a war of this nature, for sure. And I think the interests of the Syrian people have not been taken into account. So where do we go from here? If we put another regime in place, it will fall again through fighting between the various groups that you have, and you'll see the emergence of Al-Qaeda, which will be the worst
possible outcome just by pursuing interference in that machine.
Okay, I don't have top security clearances, so I've not seen the stuff. I know as much as you do from the press. I hear it probably was asking me to do the intercepts. GCHQ has got a significant part to play in a lot of this. And the communications of telephone calls or there's sort of course this has happened and there's going to be some panic phone calls as who's ordered it, and the difficulty is trying to ascertain how far up the chain of command decisions are made. And I'm not sure, but I don't know, but I'm not so sure that it is clear that they know. The second thing with regards to Russia, this is the problem with the United Nations. To be honest with you, if there was a way of creating a new organisation, I would take it. And the reason is because how on earth can we be held to ransom on the moral values of President Putin and the Chinese? I'm sorry. It is a silly situation that we cannot act. And actually that point was made a few times in the debate. And so the use of the United Nations and a reason for not going in because of the United Nations, I don't think holds any water anymore, to be honest with you, because the Russians have a vested interest in maintaining that regime. It has long been a country that they have a very strong relationship with and have protected. They have a naval base on the coast. It's their only naval base in the Mediterranean. And so, they're not going to play ball, are they, really? They're going to try desperately to maintain the status quo. And there's going to come a point where we're going to have to make a decision, a judgment, which is why the best question at PMQs yesterday came from the Father of the House. Sir Peter Tapsell asked a question yesterday. He can sometimes be much derided for rambling questions. His question yesterday showed the value of wisdom, something which doesn't seem to have much value in modern politics, because you only really get wisdom from experience and age. And he asked about the possibility of a proxy war between the US and Russia on Syrian territory. And did we know that we were in danger of going down that path, of arriving at a sort of Korean type situation or Vietnam type situation? And it actually, there was a pause in the chamber, you could tell. And I don't think people have really fully grasped the potential for this to spin out of control. And we need to recognise that, because if we are going to try and prevent further chemical weapons attacks, if we're going to try and do it, we need to recognise what might happen and where we might end up going. And so I'm prepared to vote for something. Never not be, but it's got to be well thought through. Otherwise it's not worthy of us, and it certainly wouldn't be worthy of support in the wider public. Gentlemen.
There are three forms of warfare which we have tried to avoid: nuclear war, biological war, chemical war. Whatever happens, we've been very successful as having a deterrence against nuclear war so far. Yes. We have avoided biological warfare on the grounds that the retaliation would be massive. Right. Biological warfare by a sovereign state has largely been avoided. We had it in Iraq, but we didn't do anything about it at that time, and we got it in Syria. Right? I think it's a very important aspect that we have to think about. Can we put a deterrence back in to stop either of those three from happening? I think that's a really important point. The difficulty is, how do you do it with just the deterrence effect, which is important, because the next thing could well be biological, and that would be even worse. And it's a possibility. I don't know the answers, but we've been talking about mixing those two up today, and all the time. Are we trying to get rid of the regime in Syria, or are we trying to deal with the chemical warfare? And I think they are very different, but you can't deal with them differently.
You make a very important point, and this is where the Prime Minister was right. We need to respond to, in an attempt to deter future usage. And I get that principle. The fact that we didn't with the gassing of the Kurds in Iraq is to our shame, actually. We didn't react to it. But the problem was we'd been backing Iraq versus Iran in that war. And, you know, this is the problem with cherry-picking your principles in order to suit the situation. And it sends all the wrong messages, in my experience, to the Middle East that we do this, which is why I keep talking about a wider strategy to the whole region. For example, we've always backed Sunni governments, regimes, never Shia. Shia have never exported terrorism. All Islamic terrorism that is exported has been Sunni. And so, I'm not standing here trying to give you the Foreign Office policy. I'm just saying that we really do need to go back to the principle said, what is this? What's in the Britain's national interest here? Where are we going with this? And indeed, with regards to chemical and biological weapons, what is in the globe's interest? Where are we going? And how do we seek to deter and prevent this type of outrage? It isn't by firing Tomahawk missiles at communications hubs and at office blocks where the phone call might have come to, going back to the previous question. That isn't the way you're going to prevent it, because the weapons still exist and people prepared to use them still exist. And so that's this is where the challenge